This past spring, I went to visit my dad on the West Coast, and I traveled by plane because, believe it or not, that was the least carbon-intensive way to go. But that one trip put nearly a ton of CO2 into the atmosphere. That's like driving my car for half a year. And I'm not okay with that. So I figured, if I couldn't avoid the emissions, could I offset them? You've probably heard of carbon offsets. Basically, you pay somebody to carry out a project that reduces carbon in the atmosphere to make up for the carbon that you just put into the atmosphere. They do things like building wind farms or destroying harmful gases. But you also hear a lot of criticism about them. Like this.
I think it's a scam.
That's Peter Kalmus. He's a climate scientist with NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, but he's speaking to me here on his own behalf.
You have entrepreneurs who are essentially making money off of people's climate guilt.
Peter says nobody can undo their carbon emissions. Paying somebody to plant trees doesn't change that. And offsets do have a sketchy history. Multiple studies have found that many of them don't deliver what they promise. This one, from the Center for Economic Studies in Munich, found that 52% of wind farms in India funded through a United Nations offset program probably didn't offset carbon. But Peter is right about something else. I do feel guilty. And so I can't help but wonder, is it possible to pay somebody to maybe remove an equivalent amount of carbon from the atmosphere to what I just put in?
Yes, but, the devil is in the details.
That is Michael Gillenwater. He's the executive director of the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute.
Are there projects getting certified that probably shouldn't get certified? Yes, there are. But does that mean all projects are kind of unworthy? I don't think that's true either.
Michael's institute helped publish a free online guide to help people buy quality offsets, so I decided to give it a try.
The beauty and magic of the place I come from is totally inexpressible, which is why
This is a video produced by the Coastal First Nations Great Bear Initiative. It aims to improve forest management practices in the Great Bear Rainforest on the West Coast, and thus increase carbon sequestration. But the guide says forest projects can be plagued by something called leakage. You protect some forests, but then logging companies just log somewhere else instead. And if they do, you haven't reduced carbon at all. Also, what happens if your forest gets destroyed by fire? I asked Paul Correa how they deal with these things. He's the senior policy advisor for the Coastal First Nations Great Bear Initiative Society.
There's a very conservative insurance approach to this. It's called a buffer pool. And so in round numbers, if 100% of the trees are accounted for, only 50% is up for sale.
Sounds to me like every tree has a backup, give or take.
Each year in Canada, commercial and institutional...
Now this is a video by a Quebec company called Solution Will. They work with clusters of small carbon emitters like schools and businesses to implement green energy and waste management projects. According to the guide, here I should be testing for something called additionality. Would these projects have gone ahead anyway without money from offsets? Because if they would have done, they haven't offset any carbon. I quizzed Will's president, Martin Clermont. Each project, does it receive offset funding before it starts implementing its project?
Not in our project.
It sounds like they could have done it anyway.
Not really, if they already did anyway.
Okay, my brain is melting down. There are so many questions to ask, and I barely scratched the surface. There are certification programs that do some of this work for us, like Verified Carbon Standard, for example, but they aren't perfect. Now, there are some projects that I know for sure will reduce carbon, and they definitely won't get done unless I pay for them. Namely, replacing my natural gas heating system and my gas-powered vehicle. Maybe instead of paying somebody else to green their activities, I should think about setting more money aside to green my own. For CBC Radio, I'm Heather Kitching.